We'll find out how rescuers are doing in the Philippines to see if there are any survivors of the typhoon, which struck on Tuesday. Also, the US Supreme Court is going to review the validity of a federal law defining marriage as a union between a man and a woman. It's the 25th anniversary of the founding of the Palestinian organization Hamas. We'll find out how they're celebrating that in the West Bank, which is controlled by Hamas's rivals Fatah. We'll get the week's news from the Gulf, including how Qatar, which is hosting the United Nations climate change talks, is actually the world's biggest per capita carbon footprint in the world. There must be some irony on that story. We'll hear it if there is. As David Cameron was giving his backing to churches in England and Wales being allowed to conduct same-sex marriages, the US Supreme Court agreed to review the validity of a federal law defining marriage as a union between a man and a woman. It will also consider a challenge to California's ban on same-sex marriage, known as Proposition 8, which was approved 4 years ago. Well, Lisa Phillian is the owner of Rainbow Weddings in California and an ordained reverend. Reverend Lisa, same-sex marriage is big news here in Britain, now also in the US. Are you glad the Supreme Court is going to take another look into this?
Well, that's actually a really good question. You might say that I have two horses in two races. The first horse was extraordinarily disappointed because we were defeated at the finish line. In California, if they had not agreed to review Proposition 8, legal marriage for same-sex couples would have begun immediately, and we would have had joyous couples getting married before Christmas. But as of today, we are now gearing up for the next challenge, which is where my next horse runs. We are going to now look across the United States of America, and we are going to fight for equality, not only for California, but in all 50 states of the United States.
At the moment, I understand you are only allowed to perform commitment ceremonies for same-sex couples. What do commitment ceremonies consist of? How different are they from marriages?
The ceremony itself, which is also known as a solemnization, is the religious or spiritual aspect of commitment. The legal portion, which is what we're fighting for, is separate. In the United States of America, back in the 1920s, we actually adopted what we call the marriage license, which we govern marriages with. It allows the federal government to track marriages and actually tax them or not tax them, as the case may be. This is the legal aspect that we're battling for. The religious overtones, the solemnization, is separate, and it is based on how churches review same-sex marriage. So I guess to answer your question, the difference between a commitment ceremony and a marriage is actually very little. The legal aspects is where it differs. So the ceremony itself is the solemnization and the spiritual rejoicement between the couple, regardless of whether they are a straight couple or whether they are a same-sex couple. The legal aspects... Go ahead.
And I'll be honest with you, we don't have much of a track record of Supreme Courts over here. We're getting to grips with the concept ourselves. But I do know in the United States, your Supreme Court is often controversial because they are political appointments, essentially, aren't they? And they can differ from one end of the political spectrum to the other. And generally that determines the makeup of the Supreme Court, determines how they regard issues as such. The current makeup of the Supreme Court, are you optimistic that they will redefine the term marriage, as it were?
Well, okay, again, another wonderful question. The Supreme Court is appointed because they do not want them to be influenced by the population. So it's not an elected position. It kind of separates them so they can govern with impartiality. That's the purpose of that. To your point, yes, it can be very political. We in the United States believe the Supreme Court to be, once they're appointed, they can't be unappointed. That's one thing. So even if they fall out of political favor, they are not, they can't receive pressure, let's say from President Obama or anybody else in our governmental makeup. The Supreme Court's job in this particular position is to identify and clarify the violation or non-violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, it was stated that state and federal citizenship for all persons regarding of race, both born or naturalized in the United States, would be protected, and they would have privileges and immunities of citizens, and that no persons would be deprived of life, liberty, property, or due process of law, and that no person could be deprived of or denied equal protection of the laws. Now, in the case of Proposition 8, it was found that Prop 8 actually denied equal protection of the law. Therefore, that's why they found it to be in violation of the 14th Amendment of the federal Constitution. It's the Supreme Court's job to determine what application the 14th Amendment of the federal Constitution has on all same-sex unions throughout the United States. It also is wrapping up another issue that is extraordinarily poignant, which is DOMA. It's just kind of a nickname, DOMA, which means the Defense of Marriage Act, which was put in place several years back, denying acknowledgement of homosexual couples or homosexual people in the military. And in DOMA Section 3, which is now being reviewed simultaneously as a violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, DOMA prohibits same-sex couples from, even if they're in legal marriages, not to be confused with domestic partnership that we now engage in California, legal marriages that actually are being acknowledged in New York, Massachusetts, and numerous others. It denies them federal benefits. As a matter of fact, the federal government denies them 1,138 federal rights that are now being recognized by straight couples. And that's huge.
Reverend Lisa, I feel as if I'm in that Supreme Court chamber discussing all the ins and outs of this with you, and you've done an excellent job in, breaking it down for us. I'm very grateful. Reverend Lisa Phillian there, owner of Rainbow Weddings in California, and an ordained reverend herself.
Across the UK.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. Up all night.
With Oludotun Adebayo.